I used to think my father did not know how to love a child, and for most of my life I was certain I had grown into a better man than he ever was. My name is Thomas, and I am 88 years old, and it has taken me nearly all of them to understand how wrong I was. The trouble is, understanding sometimes arrives long after the person you needed to understand is gone. My father was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that filled a room like heavy furniture. He worked at the mill his entire life, left the house before the sun came up, came back smelling of oil and metal, shoulders bent forward like he was leaning into a wind no one else could feel. When I was a boy, I measured other fathers by noise. They laughed loud, clapped their sons on the back, came to baseball games and shouted from the bleachers. Mine stood with his hands in his coat pockets and said nothing. Or he stayed home because there was always something that needed fixing. I decided early that silence meant distance. If he did not say he was proud, he must not be. If he did not hug me, he must not want to. A boy can build a whole story out of what is missing. I remember one winter when I was about 10. My boots had a hole in the sole, and snow kept slipping in, melting against my socks. I told my mother, hoping she would speak to him. That evening he came home, looked at my feet for a long second, and said, "You should have said something sooner." That was all. No softness, no smile. 2 days later, there was a new pair of boots by the door. He never mentioned them again. I wore them for 3 winters, and all I could think back then was that he made it feel like a business transaction. As I grew older, we spoke mostly in instructions. Be home by dark. Mind your mother. Do the job right the first time. I heard rules, not care. By the time I was 16, I had decided I would leave that house and become a different kind of man, a warmer one, a louder one, a man whose children would never wonder how he felt. The night I told him I was leaving town for work, he sat at the kitchen table, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. He asked what the pay was. I told him. He nodded once and said, "Save what you can." That was his farewell. I walked out, angry, carrying a suitcase and a chest full of words I thought he should have said. For years, that anger kept me company. When my own son was born, I held that baby and promised I would do everything opposite. I said, "I love you," every day. I went to every school play, every game, even the ones where he sat on the bench. I believed I was correcting a mistake my father had made. But life is long, and being a parent is longer than you think. There were nights I came home tired and quiet, my head buzzing with numbers and worries I did not want to put on a child. There were bills I paid without mention, repairs I made in the dark after everyone slept. Sometimes my son would talk, and I would listen but not have much to say, and I would see a look cross his face that felt uncomfortably familiar. I told myself it was different. I was different. But a small doubt started to live somewhere behind my ribs. My father and I never fought in a loud way. Our distance was polite. We saw each other on holidays, talked about the weather, about work, about the car. When my mother died, we stood side by side at the funeral, 2 men staring at the same hole in the ground, neither of us knowing how to step toward the other. I wanted to say something big then, something that would break the years open, but all I managed was, "You holding up?" He said, "I've been worse," and that was that. He grew older the way old men do, shrinking inch by inch. His hands, once thick and strong, started to tremble when he poured his coffee. I began driving him to appointments. The roles shifted quietly, without ceremony. Still, we talked around things, not through them. The last clear conversation we had happened on his back porch. He was 84. I was already in my 70s. The evening was cool, and he had a blanket over his knees. He asked about my son, about his job, about the house. Then he said, "You did good with him." I laughed a little and said, "I tried to be different than you." I meant it as a joke, but it landed between us like a dropped plate. He looked out into the yard for a long time. Then he said, "I did what I knew." Not defensive, not angry, just a fact, like saying the sky was cloudy. I nodded, but inside I was still a boy waiting for an apology he did not know he owed. He died the following spring. Heart gave out in his sleep. Quick, the doctor said, a mercy. I stood in his small house afterward, going through drawers that smelled like dust and soap. In the bottom of a dresser, under folded undershirts, I found a tin box. Inside were old pay stubs, my school report cards, a program from a high school play I had forgotten I was in. My name was circled in pen. There was also a photograph of me at about 8 years old, missing my front teeth, holding a crooked birdhouse. On the back, in his careful block letters, he had written, "Tom's first project, would not quit until it stood straight." I sat on his bed with that picture in my hands and felt something shift, slow and heavy, like a door that had been swollen shut finally giving way. All those years I had been measuring love by sound, by touch, by words spoken out loud. He had been speaking in a language I never learned to hear. Every overtime shift was a sentence. Every silent car repair, every envelope of cash slipped to my mother when he thought I was not looking. Every game he stood at the back for, hat in hand, not wanting to make a fuss. He had loved me in the only dialect he knew, one built from work, from presence, from showing up again and again, even when he had nothing left to say. I thought back to the boots, to the way he had noticed without me asking twice, to the way he never let the house go cold in winter, even if it meant another night shift, to that porch evening when he said, "You did good with him." Maybe that was his way of saying he hoped I would have it easier, that I would have more words than he did. The pain of it is this. By the time I understood, there was no one left to tell. No chance to say, "I see it now. I see you." Understanding can be a lonely thing when it comes late. It changed how I look at my own life. I called my son the next day and listened longer than I talked. I told him stories about his grandfather, not as a warning, but as a man who carried his love in his hands instead of his mouth. I started to notice the quiet ways people show up for each other. The meals cooked without comment, the long drives, the small repairs no one thanks you for. At 88, time feels different than it used to. It is not just something that passes. It is something I can almost see when I close my eyes, like a long road stretching out behind me, with certain days glowing brighter than the rest. Funny thing is, the moments that shine the most are not the ones I thought would matter. They are small things I barely noticed at the time. A look, a ride home in silence, a pair of boots by the door. I used to lie awake wishing I had pushed for one big conversation with my father, one honest clearing of the air where we would finally say everything we were supposed to say. I imagined it so many times that it felt almost real. Now, after all these years, I am not so sure that was ever our way. Maybe what we had was never meant to come in one grand talk. Maybe it was always meant to be understood the way I found that old tin box, one piece at a time, years later, when I finally knew how to look. From where I stand now, at the far end of things, I see how much of life gets lost between what is felt and what is said. If you still have someone in your life who seems distant, someone who does not use the words you are waiting to hear, I hope you slow down before you decide what their silence means. I hope you watch what they fix without being asked, what they remember, where they show up even when they are tired. That is a language too, even if it is not the one you prefer. And if you are like my father was, or like I have been at times, the quiet one who carries worry like a private load and assumes love should be obvious from the work alone, I want to tell you this from my own mistakes. Say a little more. Even a few clumsy words can save someone years of guessing. Pride has a way of stealing time, and time is the one thing that never waits for us to get comfortable. I cannot go back and give my father the understanding he deserved while he was still sitting at that kitchen table. I cannot let him hear me say that I see him clearly now. But inside myself, something has softened. I no longer carry him as the man who held love back. I carry him as a man who gave it steadily, stubbornly, in the only shape he knew how to make. And I was simply too young, too sure of my own definitions, to recognize it. That change in me matters, even if it came late. Some nights when the house is quiet and the day has finally let go of me, I sit in my chair and think about him. I picture his hands, the way he walked through the door after work, the way he would stand in the yard just looking around like he was checking that everything was still there. And in that stillness, I sometimes speak out loud, feeling a little foolish and a little hopeful at the same time. I say it softly, the words I carried for too long. I say, "I know now, Dad.